In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on March 1st, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start. If you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Purdue versus Ohio State. Value City Arena gets loud when something is on the line, and here it feels like one team is hanging on for dear life while the other walks in like it has seen this movie 100 times already. Ohio State sits at 17-11 overall with a strong 13-4 mark at home, but that sting from a 74-57 loss at Iowa still lingers, especially for a group fighting to keep its hopes alive. Purdue comes in at 22-6, playing with that calm, top-tier confidence, and a 7-2 road record that tells you hostile gyms have not really rattled them. Books still treat Purdue as the clear favorite, and the spread reflects a tug between Ohio State's home energy and Purdue's cold, efficient quality. Purdue plays a brand of grown-up basketball that feels very steady. They average 82.6 points per game with a plus 13.1 scoring margin, and they shoot it at close to 58% on effective field goals, which is the fancy way of saying their shots usually make sense. The turnover rate hovers near 11.7%, so they rarely hand teams free possessions. They also crash the offensive glass at about a 34% rate, which quietly crushes opponents by turning one decent trip into 2 or 3 chances. Nothing major shows up on their current injury board, so the rotation they want is the rotation they use, and you can feel that security in the way they run their sets. Ohio State lives in a different world right now, one where every lineup choice feels like a puzzle. Transfer forward, Brandon Noel has been dealing with a serious foot issue that was described as an extended absence, not a quick fix. Baylor transfer center Josh Ojanwuna is still working back from last season's ACL tear, and recent updates have framed a return this year as significantly unlikely. Freshman guard Miles Harrow is set aside on a redshirt track. On the positive side, they finally got key scorer John Mobley Jr. and versatile forward Devin Royal back in that loss at Iowa, which at least gives their perimeter and wing game some fresh life. The wild card is starting center Christoph Tilley, who aggravated a calf problem at Michigan State and then sat out against Iowa. As of now, his status for this matchup sits in that annoying gray area where you cannot honestly say he is in or out, and that uncertainty hangs over how physical Ohio State can afford to be. Stylistically, Ohio State leans far more on shot making than on bullying teams on the glass. They score around 79.5 points per game, but they sit way down the national board in both defensive rebounding and offensive rebounding. They also give up about 73.1 points a night, which is not a disaster, but it is not exactly a security blanket either. Now picture that profile matched up with Purdue's habit of hammering the offensive boards, drawing contact, and living at the free throw line. This is the kind of clash where one side keeps walking to the rim and the stripe while the other keeps having to hit jumpers just to keep pace. Purdue has already shown on the road that when things tilt their way, they can blow a game open, like those big wins at Maryland and Iowa where the margin shot into the 20s. They are 7-2 away from home, while Ohio State has gone 2-4 across its last 6 games overall, which hints at who has been more trustworthy lately. Ohio State's bench also ranks near the bottom of the country in minutes, so the same core guys often carry a heavy load, and that wear and tear gets magnified when they face a deep, physical opponent that keeps leaning on them. If this plays out the way the matchup suggests, the combination of Purdue's size, consistency, and depth over 40 minutes starts to squeeze Ohio State, and the number that looked tricky on first glance begins to feel more like a tax for backing the better, healthier group. As our first pick for this matchup, the Purdue Boilermakers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Recent trends do not quite agree, with Purdue games landing higher lately and Ohio State games more often landing lower, so anyone staring only at short-term streaks could talk themselves into either angle. Pull back and look at the bigger season picture, and the tone shifts. Purdue's games average roughly 152 points when you blend their 82.6 scored with their 69.5 allowed. Ohio State's games sit in almost the same neighborhood, in that 152 to 153 range when you pair their 79.5 on offense with their 73.1 on defense. Both teams lean on very efficient offenses, with Purdue graded among the very best nationally and Ohio State very solidly in that upper tier, while the defenses are good but do not fully clamp games into rock fights. The pace for each side usually looks slightly slower, which might sound like a recipe for fewer points, but in reality, it just means every trip down the floor tends to produce a quality look instead of chaos. Front court health, or the lack of it, shapes how many points can pile up. Ohio State's missing and limited big men have a bigger impact on their defense than on their offense, especially when you remove bodies that protect the rim and finish possessions with rebounds. If you are light on experience size, opponents grab more offensive boards, stretch possessions, and force more fouls at the rim, which slides a lot of quiet points onto the scoreboard. That shows up as second chance layups, putbacks, and trips to the stripe after a whistle that had to come because the defense was simply outmanned or a step late. On the other side of the ball, Ohio State's best realistic path to keep this competitive is not a slow, 60-possession slugfest. They need this to feel like a shot-making contest in front of their home crowd, where confidence can spread from one made jumper to the next. A healthy Bruce Thornton controlling the ball, with John Mobley Jr. and Devin Royal back in the mix, gives them multiple handles and scorers who can attack closeouts, pull up off the dribble, or kick to shooters. When a team leans into that approach, you see more three-point attempts, more drives into the paint, and more chances where either the shot drops or the defender has to foul to prevent an easy bucket. All of that nudges the total upward in a very ordinary, repeatable way. Late-game rhythm matters too. If one side has a lead and the other is chasing, those last few minutes can stretch out like chewing gum. The trailing team usually speeds up, takes quicker threes, and plays the math game of possession count, even if it means some rushed looks. Then come the intentional fouls to stop the clock, especially against a group that has shown it can knock down free throws. Each whistle adds another couple of points, and suddenly a game that looked like it might land in the mid-140s with a normal finish creeps into the low or mid-150s instead. Nothing is guaranteed. Coaches can throw in a curveball with rotations or tempo, but the combination of season-long scoring profiles, efficient half-court execution on both sides, and a likely aggressive closing stretch from the team trying to claw back supports the idea that this matchup leans more toward a scoreboard that stays busy rather than a quiet, methodical grind. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Murray State versus Bradley. This matchup feels like one of those late-season grudge games where every possession suddenly looks a little louder and a little heavier than usual. Murray State walks in as the underdog, but on paper they are not exactly some deep bench outsider sneaking into a bigger gym for a paycheck game. Both teams are right next to each other in the conference race, sitting with that same kind of 12-7 league profile that keeps coaches up late and fans checking standings on their phones. Bradley brings the proud home court, the tough building, and the reputation for playing grown man half-court basketball where you have to earn pretty much everything inside the three-point line. Their style leans into control, structure, and physical defense, the classic Missouri Valley feel where you get bumped on cuts and closeouts are actually contested, not just hand waves. On the other side, Murray State is like the wild card friend that never quite sticks to the plan. The Racers play with a scoring punch that can flip a run in a blink, putting real pressure on any favorite that tries to relax for even a couple of trips. They light it up often, but their defense gives plenty back, which sounds like a flaw, yet for an underdog it acts like chaos built into the game script. When you can score fast and also invite some mess, you create the kind of swings that keep a short margin very fragile. The first meeting between these two was not some coin flip thriller either. It was a 20-point Murray State win on their home floor, a result that says they already know they can punch through Bradley's style when things tilt their way. That memory sticks with both sides. Bradley wants payback in front of their own fans, which can bring energy, but it can also bring tension if the game stays tight into the last media timeout. Murray, on the other hand, walks in knowing the matchup is not a mystery and that their pace and aggression already cracked this puzzle once. In a spot like this, with seeding and tournament positioning baked into every timeout, high variance suddenly becomes a feature for the team catching points, not a bug. You want the side that can erase a 10-point lead in a couple of hot minutes, not just the side that looks tidy on a scouting report. Murray's offense fits that bill, with enough shot making and tempo to keep this from turning into a comfortable cruise for the home crowd. There is also the personnel layer. Murray guard Lane Taylor has been listed as questionable, which throws a little uncertainty into the rotation, but he is on the active roster and has been part of the regular mix this season. Bradley, by contrast, does not have a major absence flashing on the usual reports, so they are closer to full strength. Even with that, the matchup profile still tilts toward the underdog being live. When the home side is being asked, even quietly, to win by a clear cushion, and the visitor is built to stretch possessions and force bursts of scoring, the safer emotional side often sits with the team getting the head start on the scoreboard. You can almost picture this game sitting inside a 1 or 2 possession window in the final minute, the classic sweat where every free throw feels like a franchise referendum. As our first pick for this matchup, the Murray State Racers to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. The market clearly expects a fast, free-flowing game, one of the higher scoring projections you will see for a Missouri Valley clash, and with Murray involved, that instinct makes sense at first glance. Racers games tend to feel like they have a built-in accelerator, with their offense pushing pace and their defense happily handing extra possessions right back. If you only looked at their season scoring profile, you would nod along and say, sure, this should be another one of those track meets. Here is the thing, Bradley does not really live in that same neighborhood. Their typical game lives closer to a more moderate scoring band, where they put points on the board but not in wild, everything breaking loose fashion. They rely more on stops, on making you run half-court sets, and on turning the game into a contest of execution instead of trading haymakers every trip. When that type of team is back home in its own building, with familiar rims, familiar whistles, and a crowd that appreciates every defensive stand, the style often pulls a little more in their direction. The first meeting actually gave a small hint of that tension between styles. Murray rolled to that 20-point win, and still the total number of points only reached the low 150s. For a game that lopsided, you might expect an even more bloated final count, because blowouts often invite extra scoring in garbage time. Instead, you got a result that said, yes, both teams can score, but there is also a ceiling once the matchup settles into what each coach is willing to live with. Now layer in the calendar. This is the last day of the regular season, with tournament seeding sitting in the background of every huddle. By this point, both staffs know each other's pet actions, favorite sets, and weak spots. That usually means better defensive positioning, more targeted help, and fewer easy surprises on offense. Coaches become a little quicker with timeouts to kill momentum, which is great for their heart rate and not so great for the scoreboard. Bradley's defensive habits also matter for the rhythm. They are comfortable pushing opponents late into the shot clock, bodying cutters, and contesting at the rim. That does not always produce a low-scoring rock fight, especially with a team like Murray that wants to fire early when it can, but it does steal a few possessions here and there. You shave off a couple of transition chances, you force a couple of longer half-court trips, and suddenly the game that looked like a full sprint in the preview feels more like an intense jog with bursts. There is always a chance, with a team like Murray that leans into pace, that one hot stretch turns this into a game where the scoreboard operator gets a workout. That risk never goes away. But when you balance that against Bradley's more grounded style, the late-season familiarity, the previous head-to-head result, and the tendency for big seeding games to tighten up rather than explode, the scales start to tilt toward a result that lands below what the projection is teasing. It feels a bit like the market priced the idea of a shootout more than the reality of how often these situations grind a little. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Michigan State versus Indiana. Michigan State heads into Bloomington to take on Indiana on this March 1st afternoon, and it already feels like one of those classic Big Ten storylines that gets people talking. The visitors are riding in as a ranked group with a shiny win on the road at Purdue, finally breaking that long drought in Mackey that had hung over them since the mid-2000 teens, and their record of 23-5 overall with a 13-4 mark in league play looks clean enough to impress any casual viewer. Across from them is Indiana at 17-11 and 8-9 in conference play, still wobbling on that thin NCAA tournament bubble after getting run out of East Lansing in an 81-60 loss in January and then stumbling at home in a 72-68 collapse against a Northwestern team that has struggled in league play. Most people see that on paper, see the ranking next to the road team's name, hear elite defense, and instinctively lean toward the team in green. It sounds simple, but it really is not. The context matters. The spot here looks like a classic chance to sell high on a group that just had an emotional, season-defining road win and to buy low on a team that has been punched in the mouth and suddenly has to respond in front of its own fans. Assembly Hall is one of those places where the noise feels personal, where every whistle and every missed call gets amplified, and that kind of environment often tightens games rather than turning them into easy blowouts. Indiana has flaws, no doubt, yet in this building they still look and feel more comfortable, with an offense that flows better and typically produces around 80 points per outing, supported by a top-tier efficiency profile that sits in that national top 60 range. Michigan State leans into a grind-it-out identity that rests on defense and rebounding, content to win possessions on the glass and force opponents into tough looks instead of playing in a track meet. That style is impressive, but the funny thing about it is that it often keeps games within reach for the underdog, especially on the road where one extra turnover or one bad stretch can swing the margin very quickly. Indiana, under its current staff, prefers space, quick-hitting actions, and perimeter shots, and that kind of approach at home with a season on the line usually pushes a team toward aggression rather than caution. A group that just heard criticism from its own fan base does not typically walk into the next home game looking to play scared. It shows up trying to punch first. And sure, this same Indiana team took that 21-point loss in East Lansing. But that game was far more competitive into the second half before things unraveled, and they also carry the fresh memory of letting a comfortable lead melt away against Northwestern on this same floor. Those scars matter when the season starts to feel short. The bubble talk is loud enough that everyone in that locker room understands what another no-show at home would mean for their chances. Michigan State has been the steadier side across the season, and that steady profile is impressive, but steady also means the market has fully baked that reliability into the number. The road team is now priced like the obvious choice, tasked with winning by margin in a hostile arena against a desperate squad playing for its postseason life, and that shifts the value to the other bench. On top of that, the injury picture, with Michigan State missing a couple of rotation pieces for the long haul and Indiana still not working with its full backcourt depth and walk-on group, does not truly change who these teams are. It just shortens benches and raises the game's overall volatility a bit. In a matchup where one side wants to lean on structure and the other is trying to channel urgency in front of a raucous home crowd, that extra volatility actually favors the team catching points rather than the one trying to separate comfortably on the road. As our first pick for this matchup, the Indiana Hoosiers to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. On one hand, you have raw numbers that do not exactly whisper low scoring. Michigan State is putting up 78.4 points per game while allowing 66.4, and Indiana is right there with 79.3 scored and 72.1 allowed, which usually lands their contests in that mid-range of combined totals before you even factor in late-game free throws or one hot shooting stretch. Both offenses grade out as top 60 units in efficiency, and Indiana's defense sits in that middle tier, not terrible but definitely not scaring off opposing scorers. Recent results back that up. Indiana allowed 93 points to Purdue, then turned around and gave up 72 at home to a Northwestern team that came in with a weak league record, but still managed to post a very healthy figure in points per possession during that 72-68 upset. Michigan State brings the more polished defense, sitting in the national top 25 for points allowed and in the top 40 for efficiency, yet that did not stop Purdue from getting into the 70s in that emotional showdown. The first meeting between these two also finished at 81-60, which was not miles away from where this current number sits. Stylistically, neither group is racing up and down like it is an open gym run, but they are not dragging games into the mud either. They live in that middle lane where 60-something possessions, decent pace, good spacing, and capable shot-making can quietly add up to a game that ends with a higher combined score than you expect if you only watch a few minutes. It sounds contradictory to say that a defensive-minded team can still be part of a higher-scoring script, but that is often what happens when efficient offenses keep seeing enough possessions. The likely game script leans toward more points rather than fewer. Indiana needs to make a statement after that Northwestern loss and wants to show the committee that it has some offensive punch, especially in front of its own fans. A team in that position tends to push the issue on the attacking side, not just sit around hoping the opponent has an off-shooting night. With rotations tightened by those lingering depth concerns, the legs usually go on defense before they go on offense, which is how you get second-half stretches where stops become harder to find. Those are the stretches where you start seeing quicker closeouts, lazier box outs, and more easy looks at the rim or open threes on the kick out. Then there is the late-game chaos factor that always matters in college hoops. If this stays reasonably close, you have every chance of a foul and free throw sequence in the final minute or two, the kind that turns a normal final score into something a little louder. Michigan State is too well coached and too balanced to simply milk the clock and hope the game dies quietly, so they will keep running their sets, attacking the glass, and punishing defensive breakdowns if Indiana presses for a comeback. Put all of that together and the raw data suggests that the current number sits a little low compared to how both teams usually score and allow points, and the narrative of a desperate offense-capable home side facing a confident and efficient visitor only adds more oxygen to that scoring fire. Nothing guarantees a shootout, that is always the honest truth, and this part of the read lives in the space between data and feel, but given how these two have played and where this line is set, it feels much more comfortable to believe in points than to spend 40 minutes hoping for a defensive rock fight. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Belmont versus Illinois State. Illinois State walks into this regular season finale with a chance to turn a solid year into something that feels a little bigger, and you can almost feel that campus energy building as tip-off gets closer. Belmont shows up with that shiny 26-4 record and an offense that has been humming, putting up about 84 points per game while hitting better than 51% from the field and over 40% from three, so on paper this looks like the classic matchup of the slick scorer against the stubborn defender. Those numbers are not just fluff, they tell you this Bruins group loves rhythm, spacing, and catch and shoot threes, the sort of style that can run opponents right out of the gym if you let them get comfortable early. Illinois State, though, has quietly put together a 19-11 campaign built on balance, shooting around 47% themselves while holding opponents to about 68 points a night, which is good enough to sit among the stingier defenses in the country. That combination of sturdy defense and efficient scoring is not glamorous. It is more like a reliable work truck than a sports car, but it travels, and it tends to hold up especially well in these late-season Missouri Valley games when legs get tired and every possession starts to feel heavy. Honestly, that is where the Redbirds' personality shows. They are comfortable in games that slow down, that lean on physicality, and that test whether you are still willing to cut hard and fight for a rebound on possession number 60. There is also the little storyline of familiarity. We already saw how this matchup looks when these teams met in Nashville back on January 24th, when Belmont picked up an 80-69 win. But Illinois State never exactly folded and kept things competitive even while the Bruins were shooting a very high percentage. Now the roles flip, same two teams, but Illinois State is at home on Doug Collins' court in front of fans who remember that earlier loss. And home court in this league for a defense-first team like this usually buys you a few extra plays where the opponent looks just a little rushed or uncomfortable. Health tilts their way too. Recent reports list no active injuries for the Redbirds, while Belmont has been managing its guard rotation with Nick McClain dealing with an undisclosed issue that has him expected to miss an extended stretch, and with pieces like Wynn Miller asked to handle shifting minutes and roles as the season wears on. That might sound small, but when a team that wants to play fast loses a steady backcourt option, it can show up in subtle ways. A late clock turnover here or a rush jumper there. The exact little cracks a home-oriented, defensive-minded group loves to squeeze through. Put it all together, the high-flying resume on one side and the defensive spine plus home crowd on the other, and Illinois State looks like the side more likely to keep this thing within that betting window and maybe even nudge it their way against the number, whether the market finally lists them as catching a few points or laying a tiny one. As our first pick for this matchup, the Illinois State Redbirds to cover the spread, whether they close as tiny favorites or short underdogs at your book, is our full game side pick. Belmont's season profile is loud. They average just over 84 points per game with one of the most efficient shooting clips in the country, north of 51% from the floor and above 40% from beyond the arc, so their games can feel like they are always one hot stretch away from blowing up the total. Illinois State pushes back with a different rhythm, scoring around 75 points themselves but pairing it with that defense that allows only about 68 points per outing, a combo that naturally pulls overall scoring toward the mid-140s instead of the wild shootouts people might imagine if they only glance at Belmont's numbers. Here is the thing, when one team wants to run and sling threes and the other wants you to live in half-court sets, especially in early March, the pace battle often leans toward the slower side because rotations tighten, scouting is sharper, and every empty trip suddenly feels huge. The first meeting already hinted at that ceiling. They combined for 149 points in Belmont's building, which is solid offense for both sides, but still shy of the fireworks that the Bruins' raw averages might suggest on their own, even with how well they shot in that matchup. Now the rematch comes in normal with the regular season winding down, so possessions tend to slow even more. Coaches hunt mismatches. Both teams know each other's pet actions, and that usually trims a few easy buckets, turning transition chances into cautious pullbacks and resets. Belmont still has the shooting to pop for a big number on any given afternoon. There is always that tiny fear of an outlier heater, yet Illinois State's track record of holding opponents near that high 60s, low 70s band suggests a pretty firm lid on how wild this can realistically get if the Redbirds are doing their usual work on the glass and forcing the Bruins to chew clock in the half court. Add in the cumulative fatigue of a long season, officiating that may quietly favor physical defense as long as it stays honest, and the simple awareness on both benches that a conference tournament run is right around the corner, and the ingredients lean toward a methodical, lower-scoring flow rather than 40 minutes of pure track meet basketball. So while the raw scoring punch on Belmont's side might tempt some people to expect a high-scoring script, the matchup context, the first meeting result, and Illinois State's consistent defensive identity all point toward a total that lands under what many would guess just from glancing at the season averages. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Charleston versus UNC Wilmington. Charleston and UNC Wilmington set up as one of those conference games that feels a little bigger than the schedule line suggests, with Charleston sitting at 20-10 and UNC Wilmington cruising at 25-4. The scene in Wilmington matters too. Trask Coliseum has been a tough place to walk into all season, and you can feel that home crowd tilt things a bit before the ball even tips. Charleston wants this thing to feel like a long pickup run, plenty of possessions, a lot of shots, and a style that leans into rhythm more than control. UNC Wilmington is comfortable living in a different lane. They score enough to scare people, but they lean on structure, defense, and a tempo that feels more like they are editing the game than just playing in it. The first time these two met, in Charleston, UNC Wilmington walked in, dealt with the Cougars' tempo, and walked out with a double-digit win that never really felt like a smash and grab. That result is a pretty loud hint that the matchup itself leans toward the Seahawks, because when you go into the other team's gym, handle their preferred style, and still control the night, that is the kind of thing that usually travels to the rematch. Charleston has treated spread bettors kindly through most of the season, especially in this recent stretch, and that naturally tempts people to keep riding them. UNC Wilmington, on the other hand, did not start out as the most profitable spread team, but they have come into this game on a strong run where wins and covers keep lining up together, which is often a sign that the market has been a little slow to fully price in how complete they really are. You mix that with the home floor energy, with the confidence that comes from already having solved this opponent once, and with the fact that UNC Wilmington's balance gives them more ways to be right over 40 minutes, and the picture leans in a very specific direction, even if the margin is not expected to be enormous. As our first pick for this matchup, the UNC Wilmington Seahawks to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. If you just glance at what these teams average over a full season, you might expect something pretty lively, because both sides are capable of hanging a respectable total on the board on most nights. Once you remember this is a late-season conference game between the teams at the top of the standings, with one already crowned and both thinking about tournament play, it starts to feel more like a careful chess game than an open gym. UNC Wilmington's defense has been the quiet star of their season, regularly holding opponents in check and forcing them into the kind of half-court possessions that bleed the clock. They are not flashy on that end, but they are stubborn, they contest, they rebound, and they take away easy rhythm shots that usually feed higher scores. In the first meeting, that approach showed up clearly. Charleston, usually happy to throw points at people in their own building, ended up stuck well below some of their bolder nights, and the combined score stayed under what many expected beforehand. Charleston has also shown a pattern of ending up in more lower-scoring finishes than you would guess from their reputation as the fun offense in the matchup. It is one of those quirks where the brand screams fireworks, but the full season ledger quietly leans toward games that do not fully explode, especially when opponents are organized and physical. UNC Wilmington lands slightly more often on the higher scoring side of things across their schedule, but a good chunk of those games came against softer defenses or situations where the shooting spiked, not necessarily in tightly contested, familiar league matchups like this one. The injury picture nudges things toward fewer points as well. Charleston is missing a dynamic guard in Mr. Dean for the year, which shrinks their ball handling and creation depth, and forward Will Mortimer has been sidelined with a concussion that has kept him off the floor for a long stretch. On the UNC Wilmington side, guard C.J. Luster II is sitting out the season on a red shirt, and forward Gavin Walsh has been working through a knee issue that has left his status in the gray area from game to game. Shorter or shakier rotations do not always mean fewer points, but in a game like this, where every trip matters and coaches are a bit more conservative with who they trust, it often leads to more deliberate possessions and fewer extended runs. Put all of that together, a strong, consistent defense from UNC Wilmington, a Charleston team that has quietly leaned to the lower side more often than not, a previous meeting that landed below the general expectation, and several rotation pieces either out or not fully settled. And the most reasonable expectation is a game that plays tighter and cooler on the scoreboard than the raw offensive reputations might suggest. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.